The other day, my son and I, Michael, who's home, watched Jaws. Remember Jaws? It's the 50th anniversary. So we watched the movie Jaws, and there's something really haunting about that movie. The intensity and the relentlessness of this shark. It never stops, just devours everything in its path. And it almost wins in the end. It almost takes out these guys who are trying to kill it. And it's just by coincidence, I think, that Michael and I watched Jaws, and then I read this excerpt from the letter of the Galatians, St. Paul's letter to the church. It has that haunting line. This is Galatians, especially chapter 5 here, I think is such a powerful piece of the New Testament. And Paul wrote, "If, however, you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another." If you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another. And I think that one of the things about the movie Jaws that is the dead eyes of the shark. There's just no light in those eyes at all. And if this whole summer wasn't a coincidence, building up to this sermon this morning, over spring break we went to the Baltimore Aquarium, which has this huge shark tank, so to speak, and you can see them up close. And this is a creature that has absolutely no concept of compassion or mercy. It's just a killing machine. And what an apt metaphor for the time in which we live. St. Paul could write his letter to the Galatians. He could write it to the churches of the world in our own time. This simple piece of obvious wisdom that he records. If, however, you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another. You see, this is always the risk, isn't it? When we bite and seek to devour one another. When we choose what St. Paul in his letter this morning calls the fruit of the flesh. This is the fruit of our base human nature. Enmities, strife, anger, quarrels, dissensions, factions, envy. Surely we're not witnessing any of that, are we? Maybe? Just a little bit? See, here's what you learn, right? If we're going in the ways in which, in this public fighting, that has escalated to the point of real violence. We have people being gunned down for belonging to the wrong political party. We're seeing this rise of political violence in the United States. But here's what you learn, for example, so my son is featuring heavily in this sermon this morning. So both Mikey and I, when he was here, we for years we went to a boxing gym together. And here's what you learn when you get into a boxing ring. You're gonna get hit. Okay? It doesn't matter how good you are. You're going to get hit. And I'll tell you a funny story parenthetically. A couple of years ago, when Gary Stover was senior warden, he was sitting in my office on a Sunday morning. I came in and I had a black eye. Many of you, I was very pleased to see, did not notice that I had a black eye. My glasses seemed to cover it. And Gary's looking at me and he says, "Why do you have a black eye, Father Russ?" And I said, "Oh, well, I was sparring with this 18-year-old in the ring, and he didn't have good self-control, and so I got plastered in the eye." Gary thought about that for a minute, and he said, "I don't think that's what happened." He said, "I just think you got your butt kicked." And he was not far wrong about that. This is when we choose the way of enmity and strife and factions, when we choose to relate one to another, following here what St. Paul calls the fruit of the flesh, again, our base, unbridled human nature. What happens? Beware. Beware that you do not devour one another. And some of us may have had experiences. So I think the church can serve as a good example. Maybe some of us have been part of congregations that divided into factions. Maybe part of us that could be part of our church experience, where we have watched conflict and dissension come into a Christian congregation and destroy it from the inside out as the people in the church come after one another, dividing into factions. And then, are there really any winners? I've never really seen it happen. Never seen it happen. Typically what happens is when we turn on one another with such vehemence, with such violence, and we engage in the fruit of the flesh, I think basically all we see are wounded bodies. It's what happens. And this is what Paul this morning is warning us. And he uses that very language. He uses the language of warning, doubles it. I am warning you as I warned you before. It doesn't take an advanced theological degree to predict what happens in human relationships when we turn on one another and we practice the fruit of the flesh. What Paul is encouraging us to this morning is something I think, as I've been thinking about it this week, I'm wondering, has it just become old-fashioned? Am I going to show my age this morning in relating to you what I think Paul is calling us to? Now, it's not just me. New Testament scholarship, under interpreting St. Paul here this morning, Paul is talking about character. Do you remember character? Do you remember that? Do you remember when we were able to see the character of a human person or the character of a community. Communities have a character. Where once upon a time, I think, now I'm not talking about lip service given to character. I'm not talking about that. And I'm not talking about the kinds of ad hominem, the kinds of personal attacks. So public. No. I'm talking about when our character, what kind of people we are, mattered. And there were ways in which we understood that certain habits and practices, ways of relating one to another, hold those up, and here's another old-fashioned term, were virtuous. I've been in situations, not within the church, I mean it, not within here, but out in the world, where people have giggled at the word virtuous. As if the idea of being virtuous is something so outdated as to be almost silly. Who in the modern age would ever possibly consider developing, either personally or corporately, a good character? To have some understanding of the good, of what a good character is, a virtuous character. That's why I think the word virtuous is more accurate than something as sort of open-ended as the word good. Because virtue means excellence. That's what the Latin word virtue translates into English as excellent. What is excellent? And doesn't it seem out in the world that the idea of virtue, say for example, as the New Testament defines virtue, it's still foolishness. St. Paul wrote this almost 2,000 years ago. That the virtues of the Christian tradition, the virtues of Jesus Christ, are foolishness to the world. Who would ever stand up to rigorous honesty? I'm not just talking about living in our information silos and parroting what we're told. I'm talking about a true and rigorous honesty. Fair play. Fair play. To be fair in our interactions, to be fair in our dealings. Whatever happened to compassion? Whatever happened to compassion? Compassion is out the window. Because from one perspective, our country has become, and our communities have become so divided that everyone is a villain. By all accounts, we are the worst human beings to ever inhabit the planet. And all we have to do is listen to other people who talk about how awful they are. They're villains. I love that term, villain. To be villainous or vicious. That's the other word for the fruit of the flesh. It is from the word vice. What is the opposite of a virtue is a vice. And what is a vice is something vicious. And so, according to the New Testament, strife, jealousy, idolatry, quarrels, dissensions, factions, envy, these are vicious ways of being. And they do comprise character. That is a character. Characteristics that we can choose. And Paul acknowledges that we have the freedom to choose these. We have the freedom to be vicious. To be vicious. And maybe from one perspective, we might ask the question, how can we survive in the world if we are not vicious too? If we're going to swim with the sharks, then don't we also need to be a shark? Who wants to be a fool? Who wants to be a patsy? Who wants to be ridiculous, silly, naive? With our talk of character and our talk of virtue. Did the virtuous ever get rich beyond our wildest imaginations? No, not really. The virtuous gain real power. Power. So, love it. How many of you do I have to devour? Of course, at the risk of being devoured. Part of the point. But contrast what Paul gives us this morning at the end of this passage we have here, chapter 5 of Galatians. Paul sums up Christian character. If we ever had the question, according to the New Testament, what are the characteristics of a disciple of Jesus Christ? What are the personal characteristics of one who has said yes to following Jesus? What kinds of habits, what kinds of practices, what kind of people, under the inspiration of God's Holy Spirit, do we strive to be? And what kinds of communities do we form? And again, all of this is predicated. All of this is predicated on what Paul here identifies as the whole of the Old Testament. The whole of the Old Testament summed up in this one line, and it may sound familiar: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no getting away from this. There's no getting away from the love of neighbor. If we're going to be faithful and true to our Lord Jesus Christ, there just is no way around it. Either we take the love of neighbor seriously, or, like many of our sisters and brothers this morning, we stay home and stay in bed. I don't know, maybe they're watching online. Well, I don't know. I kid, I jest. There's no getting around the love of neighbor. And so here it is. Here it is. What you've always wanted to know. Russ, Paul, Jesus, what is Christian character? Christian character is this: love. agape love, practical love, joy. I wonder if your heart longs for joy the way mine does, to experience that deep joy. Peace. Anybody here long to live in peace? Anybody? That deep, deep desire of our hearts to live with peace? I do. Patience. Patience. What all of you are practicing right now while I'm still talking. Patience. Deep patience. Patient with one another. What a gift. What a gift. To be patient with ourselves, to be patient with others. Kindness. Simple kindness. Generosity. Faithfulness. Gentleness. And self-control. Self-control. Now, we have to add one to Paul's list, because Paul talks about this one in a different letter, but we always have to include hope. We always have to include hope. And this is who a Christian is. This is who Jesus Christ is. This is who Christians are called to be. This is the character that we are called to live into, and it is a virtuous character. It is a character of excellence. And so I'll read it to you one more time, remembering, as always, that this is just a choice. We have been set free. Christ has set us free. We're free. We have been set free, and now we can choose what kind of people we want to be, what kind of relationships we want to foster, what kind of community we want to build. And if we want ourselves, our relationships, our communities to be authentically Christian, then they will look like this. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, and hope.